Part 57. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 563. Tisk, my cat servant, he was complaining and looking down on me. Looking at the latest weekly issue of Shonen Jump, Makoto Takahashi closed the comic book with some dissatisfaction, and sighed to Rina, but now he shamelessly took the comic manuscript and published it without any deletions. Tisk. He is such a spineless guy. Ah, Makoto-kun, are you expressing your dissatisfaction? Rina looked at Makoto Takahashi with a smile, and picked up the comic manuscript thrown on the desk by Makoto Takahashi. Makoto-kun looked very happy. Yada. Even a mere witch has begun to learn how to complain about me. Makoto Takahashi used his secret technique True Killing with Sister in Arms on Rina, and captured Rina, who was beginning to move towards black-hearted wrong path. Sure enough, voice actor training is a heresy. It turns out that the witch who belongs to me has also been gradually eroded by this turbid world. Makoto-kun, don't you want me to be a voice actor? Rina, who was originally hugged by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist and wanted to struggle, trembled slightly after hearing what Takahashi Makoto said, and asked timidly. Of course, Takahashi Makoto actually gave a wrong answer at this time. Isn't the fate of a witch to be imprisoned by the devil for life? But now you have broken free from the devil's shackles, and from the witch who originally belonged to the devil, you have become an existence that fascinates everyone. How can such a thing be accepted? You know, witches and demons are a perfect match. The only one who can enjoy everything a witch has is the Demon King. Is Makoto-kun jealous? Rina, who was a little unhappy about the answer of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist just now feels full of happiness. It's really hard to guess a woman's mind, let alone a witch of this level. Compared to Makoto Takahashi and Rina, a certain editor Yujiro is also showing affection with his talented cartoonist at the moment. No, it should be said that they are performing a high-energy affection show in an alternative way, right? Like Makoto Takahashi, the Hero Academy serialized by Eiji Shinzuma in the weekly magazine is also a comic centered on the theme of heroes. On the one hand, they are trying to show favor to each other, and on the other hand, they are also trying to compete with each other. Actually, there is nothing wrong with this. After all, although the two cartoonists have reached an alliance in private and jointly built a virtual cartoonist Makoto Shinkai, this cannot conceal the competitive relationship between the two cartoonists. Yujiro's attention and importance to the comic Hero Academy is no less than Yoshida's to the comic One Punch Man. Actually, there is nothing wrong with this. After all, although the two editors in charge are also minions of the weekly editorial side, they are full of the consciousness of competing with each other, just like the mentality of parents who think my child is better. Just like Yoshida would not deliberately mention the excellent performance of the manga Hero Academy in front of Makoto Takahashi, Yujiro would never tell Nyaizuma Eiji about the brutal performance of the manga One Punch Man in front of Nyaizuma Eiji. The two editors in charge, who have already formed a tacit understanding, know very well that since the two manga with similar themes were serialized in the weekly magazine at the same time, the competition between the two cartoonists has already begun. Even without the two editors in charge using any means to instigate, the two cartoonists will compete and fight according to their instincts. The same theme, different plots, the two cartoonists will become more and more powerful in the battles of victory and defeat, and the comics will become more and more exciting. Yujiro originally thought so, and he was right. But when Yujiro finished reading the latest chapter of the manga One Punch Man, he instantly felt that he should feel that his cartoonist Nyaizuma Eiji was cheated by a certain middle school cartoonist. Although Yujiro also admitted that the plot of this episode of the comic One Punch Man is really interesting, but please don't forget that Eiji Nyaizuma is also serializing another comic called Hero Academy in the weekly magazine. What is the plot of the second half of the latest episode of One Punch Man? Didn't we agree to draw a hero comic together? Takahashi Makoto, in the second half of the comic, you discredited some heroes in order to enhance the charm of Saitama teacher's character. I understand, but you drew it like this and dragged the hero profession, which was originally admired and worshipped, directly into the depths of hell. So, the editor-in-chief Yujiro, who felt aggrieved because of being innocently shot, did not say much to his colleague Yoshida, but came to Eiji Niizuma as soon as he finished reading the comic. It was really a childish act, like complaining to an adult after being wronged. Nizuma-kun, after reading the latest chapter of One Punch Man by Hao Winkuma, you should agree with me, right? Yujiro looked at Nizuma Eiji expectantly, complaining in a slightly unhappy tone. Although the results have not been counted yet, your Manga Hero Academy might also be affected by the content of this chapter by Hao Winkuma, right? If it were usual, after reading the manga, Nizuma Eiji would always make some sounds imitating unknown creatures, or do some seemingly meaningless but quite dangerous behaviors. But just like today, after reading the manga manuscript, I fell into a state of complete silence. Editor Yujiro said that this was the first time he had seen the new wife Eiji in such an abnormal state. Hello, Niizuma-kun. I mean Niizuma-kun. Seeing the long silence of classmate Niizuma Eiji, Yujiro called out anxiously, did you hear what I just said? Stop reading comics. I think we should do it now, let's discuss it. Teacher from the Phoenix Institute is really awesome. Ignoring Yuichiro's urgent call, Eiji, the new wife, silently put down the comic magazine as if he had just come back to his senses. The meaning of a hero, the comic One Punch Man is better than I imagined. It's even more interesting to say. It's very interesting. Yujiro did not deny the charm of the plot of the comic One Punch Man, but he was more worried about the impact of this plot on the comic Hero Academia. But is it really okay for Shinzuma-kun to be like this? You must know that this is the same type of manga. Hey, Yuichiro-san, you didn't understand the true intention of Phoenix-in Sensei's manga. Eiji Niizuma interrupted Yujiro's words unceremoniously, and then Eiji Niizuma decisively launched a sarcasm at Yujiro. Skill. As expected, Yuichiro-san is an idiot. Huh, sure enough, among editors, Yujiro is the editor in charge who has the least human rights, absolutely no one. This is Phoenix-in Teacher's pre-war declaration. This is Phoenix-in Teacher's reminder to prepare for a big move. Do you understand? Yujiro-san, can't you see it? Compared to Editor-in-Chief Yujiro's confused reaction, Niizuma Eiji seemed to entered into a mysterious hot-blooded excitement state. Each and every question was filled with strong fighting spirit, like a stormy sea, making the Editor-in-Chief Yujiro feel overwhelmed. So the next plot of the comic One Punch Man will be super interesting and super exciting, and according to my prediction, the most exciting and most anticipated content will definitely be in the next 3 episodes. Appeared in it? Yujiro didn't say much about Eiji Niizuma's understanding of the manga, but Yujiro couldn't ignore Eiji Niizuma's speculation about the manga One Punch Man or act like he didn't hear it. You must know that to this day, there is a legend among the editors of weekly magazines that Eiji Niizuma's predictions about comics are 100% accurate. No, it is not so much a legend, but it is better to say that Eiji Niizuma has already acquiesced in this special ability. Then Niizuma-kun, are you planning to avoid the chance of a head-to-head confrontation with the Phoenix Academy teacher, or? Although he did not give any other options, according to Yuichiro's understanding of Niizuma Eiji, the cartoonist under his command is, in terms of comics, he has a self-esteem similar to the dignity of the emperor cannot be challenged. Of course I choose to fight head-on. Eiji Shinzuma's choice turned out just as Yujiro expected. Very good. However, Yujiro's joy lasted less than a second before he was frightened by Eiji's next move. Mr. Shinzuma, what are you doing? Because Eiji Shinzuma actually tore the completed manga manuscript into pieces right in front of Yujiro's eyes. Huh? Yuichiro-san, can't you see? Eiji, the new wife, tilted her head and looked at Yuichiro with an innocent face. In order to respond to the Phoenix Academy teacher, of course it is necessary to complete a manga manuscript with more powerful combat capabilities. But, the corners of Yuichiro's mouth kept twitching, as if he had been deprived of his complete ability to speak. But Shinzuma-kun, you don't have to tear up the completed manga manuscript, right? But a manga manuscript of this level will definitely not win over the teacher from the Phoenix Institute. Eiji Niizuma squatted on a chair, kept poking the table with his fingers, and complained to Yuichiro in a very aggrieved tone, or rather, state your will. I don't want to lose. Okay, looking at his new wife Eiji like this, Yuichiro couldn't blame him anymore. Previously, he had deliberately asked Eiji Niizuma to observe the plot of the manga One Punch Man. Yuichiro might have wanted to stimulate Eiji Niizuma, although Eiji Niizuma tearing up the completed manga manuscript was a little beyond Yuichiro's expectations, but now seeing Eiji Shinzuma working hard and preparing for a duel with Takahashi Makoto let's hurt each other, Yuichiro feels that this seems to be, not bad. But Eiji Niizuma was able to deduce the explosive and igniting points of the upcoming manga One Punch Man from the second half of that episode. To a certain extent, he is definitely a genius, right? At least Yuichiro said that he couldn't do this at all. At this moment, Yuichiro seemed to vaguely understand why Takahashi Makoto and Eiji Izuma were able to cooperate smoothly, or, in other words, why he could never keep up with Eiji Izuma's rhythm. Sure enough, the reason why geniuses disdain to communicate with ordinary people, is because the structure of brain circuits is different from ordinary people. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 564. Just as there is competition between several cartoonists on the cartoonist side, there is also competition between the editors in charge of several cartoonists on the weekly editorial side. Especially when the big brawl of Makoto Takahashi and others started, the secret competition between the editors in charge of several new serials also began. Of course, this is a healthy competition. The editors in charge of the weekly magazines will naturally not be stupid enough to destroy the signboard of the weekly magazine because of internal fighting. So don't look at the surface. The editors in charge of the weekly magazine always like to use sharp words to play the game of hurting each other, but in fact, the editors in charge of the weekly magazine also share the information obtained from the cartoonist side in this way to prevent certain unexpected events. What is certain unexpected events? For example, a willful genius cartoonist who wants to temporarily replace the serialized comics, or a middle school cartoonist who always likes to make trouble and launches some purposeless and meaningless things for no reason, or a cartoonist of a good friend group who is stubborn to the point of paranoia, and so on. Therefore, in less than a day, the editor-in-chief Yuichiro, who is a weekly editor's lackey, revealed Nizuma Eiji's evaluation and prediction of the manga One Punch Man to Yoshida, who is also a weekly editor's lackey. Did Nizuma Eiji really say that? Yoshida pinched his chin and looked at Yuichiro in surprise. After seeing the latter's repeated assurances, Yoshida's doubts deepened. That doesn't make sense. Chen told me before that it would take a long time to think about how to complete the subsequent plot of the comic One Punch Man. Isn't the result obvious, Yoshida-kun? Yuichiro pondered for a moment, and patted Yoshida's shoulder sympathetically. You said you haven't figured out how to conceive the comic, you must have been deceived by Mr. Howinkuma. Mr. Howinkuma is very likely, no, he must have thought of the subsequent plot of the comic One Punch Man. After all, Mr. Howinkuma is a monster-level comic artist who is as famous as genius comic artist Nizuma-kun. Deception or something, it shouldn't be that serious. Originally, Yoshida wanted to say this, but when he thought of the joyful smile of a certain Chuyuni comic artist, he decisively swallowed back what he wanted to say, and then sighed inexplicably, and nodded helplessly to agree with his colleague's words. Yoshida-kun, let me tell you, Nizuma-kun's predictions about comics have never been wrong. Yuichiro, who had obviously regarded Nizuma Eiji as a great prophet of comic artists, showed a fanatical look on his face when he saw Yoshida agree with his words. Then Yuichiro, who tried to develop Yoshida into a fanatical believer, immediately changed the topic, since Nezuma-kun said so. Then the next 3 chapters of the comic One Punch Man by Hao Winkuma will definitely be very exciting. Well, it would be great if that's the case. Yoshida was obviously a little absent-minded to perfunctory Yujiro, and at the same time, he was thinking about how to further observe the subsequent plot of the comic One Punch Man from Makoto Takahashi in advance. I'm looking forward to it too. Yujiro did not notice Yoshida's absent-mindedness, but instead sighed, the comic plot that can make Nezuma-kun serious, it would be great if I could see it in advance. See it in advance? Although the words were spoken carelessly, the listeners were intentional. Yujiro's casual words reminded Yoshida that a certain Chuyuni manga artist had given him the comic manuscript of One Punch Man in order to declare his deep love for comics. Well, it was the original version with a very magical style. Even if Takahashi Makoto deliberately said that the subsequent plot of the comic was not completed, it is not impossible to see the subsequent plot of the comic One Punch Man in advance. Just thinking of the magical style of the original version and the psychological damage that may be caused to the observer, Yoshida suddenly felt that it was okay to wait for a few days. Thinking of the twisted and magical style of the original version, Yoshida's mouth twitched a little. Obviously, it is a comic by the same cartoonist, and it is obviously completed by a certain Chuyuni manga artist. Why is the difference in style so exaggerated? You must know that the comic One Punch Man serialized in the weekly magazine nowadays can really attract readers, not just the interesting plot. In this comic, the sharp style of painting displayed by Makoto Takahashi is also an important factor in the success of this comic. But look at the style of the original version, let alone the storyboards of other cartoonists, it may not be as good as the Stickman vs. Stickman drawn by some kindergarten kids. Watch it or not. This is a decision that requires great courage to make. For Yoshida, reality is full of trials. So, in order to pass the trial, Yoshida naturally chose. I said, Chang, are you sure you haven't figured out how to draw the subsequent plot? Of course, Makoto Takahashi stared at Yoshida for a while, turned his head and complained unhappily, Tisk, I feel that wasting time on thinking about this kind of thing will greatly hinder my journey with the witch to conquer the demon world. Hey, Chang, is it too unnatural and fake for you to change the subject? Don't turn your head away. This is obviously a guilty conscience. Yoshida looked at Takahashi Makoto, who looked obviously guilty. He immediately became stronger and his voice became louder. I've said it before, right? Eiji Niizuma is looking forward to the follow-up plot of your manga. He even tore up the completed manga manuscript and redrawn it. I'm very curious about the comic plot that allows Eiji Shinzuma to do this. Really, Makoto Takahashi's long tone gave an editor-in-chief an ominous premonition, and the next words from a middle-class manga artist confirmed Yoshida's uneasy feeling. Speaking of which, since you are looking forward to the follow-up plot of the comic, my cat, my familiar, it also proves that the original version of the comic manuscript that was entrusted to you, you didn't read it at all, right? Ugh. Misstep. Seeing Takahashi Makoto's familiar joyful smile after he turned his back on his guests, Yoshida instantly understood that he was unaware that he had done it again without any precautions. Got fooled. The reason why you are able to chase the existence like a mirror, the moon in the water, is because your love for comics is not deep enough. My beloved cat, you are really qualified to observe the comics of One Punch Man draft. Makoto Takahashi ignored Yoshida's increasingly ugly expression and instead activated the taunt skill with full force. Tisk, 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 after all these years of living, I have never seen such a shameless person. Grandfather in heaven, is this the moment when you once told me men have to fight? Yoshida, who already understood that Takahashi Makoto was deliberately delaying his observation of the manga manuscript, naturally came to the door early the next morning, hoping to take advantage of the power of I have seen through all the truth to obtain it from Takahashi Makoto. The One Punch Man manga manuscript used for serialization, of course, By the way, I also revealed some information from Yujiro to Makoto Takahashi. Originally, Yoshida's plan was not wrong, but it's a pity. It's a pity that Yoshida, who is the editor-in-chief of the weekly, really underestimated the cartoonist Phoenix Inferno who calls himself the crazy demon god. Well, since your performance today, my companion cat, has made me very happy, I can give you a little right to observe the manga manuscript. Makoto Takahashi looked at the man who was surrounded by the black energy of resentment. Yoshida took out a thick pile of manga manuscripts from the desk drawer and looked at Yoshida with a smile. In other words, do you want to get my dependent cat through fighting? Although you can get more after winning. It's a comic book, but my companion cat's fighting prowess, forget it. If it can give you a little more pleasure, I won't mind talking about it. I would mind. After seeing Makoto Takahashi take out the manga manuscript, Yoshida immediately calmed down. Recalling his previous words and deeds that tried to challenge Makoto Takahashi, Yoshida suddenly broke into a cold sweat. After responding forcefully, he immediately strategically changed the topic. But compared to other things, as the editor-in-chief, I should naturally give priority to reviewing comic manuscripts. Well, this kind of honest reaction that says you don't need your body, appears on you, the cat of my family, it really makes me sick. Seeing Yoshida reaching out to grab the manga manuscript, Takahashi Makoto but he moved the comic manuscript a little faster. Speaking of my companion cat, are you sure you really want to observe the comic manuscript here? Of course, Yoshida nodded firmly, but his eyes were fixed on the comic manuscript in Takahashi Makoto's hand. After pondering for a moment, he said earnestly, speaking of Cheng, I remember I said this before, right? But in order to finish those comic manuscripts, you stayed up late again, right? Hey, my beloved cat, I just didn't sleep all night, huh? Don't use your human standards to measure me. Takahashi Makoto raised the comic manuscript in his hand, and, who told you these comics? Was the draft completed in one night? Huh? Is that so? Yoshida also knew that Takahashi Makoto could not complete such a thick stack of manga manuscripts in one night, but he did not continue to discuss this topic. Instead, he asked with some confusion, you are reading this here. Is there anything inconvenient about the comic manuscript? No, I didn't plan to take CG to get a copy of Yellow-Haired Glasses Go Killing today, but... Makoto Takahashi handed the manga manuscript to Yoshida, and under the other's doubtful eyes, he revealed an evil look. With an interesting smile, it's just my beloved cat, when you are observing the comic manuscript, but don't cry. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Email. Chapter 565. Don't cry. Yoshida scoffed at Makoto Takahashi's wicked well-intentioned reminder and didn't take it seriously. You must know that as the editor-in-chief of the weekly Shonen Jump, Yoshida's daily work, in addition to collecting manga manuscripts from his cartoonists, naturally also involves observing and reviewing the comics of new cartoonists who submit submissions to the weekly, especially in the manga Sun Jump after the animation of Dream Eater. Many more people were infected by the dreams and enthusiasm of the good friends Ajumu and determined to become cartoonists. Each editor in charge is responsible for observation and review every day. The work of comic manuscripts has also increased. The number of newcomers submitting articles to the weekly has increased, and correspondingly, the number of comic manuscripts has also increased. Even though the evaluation standards on the editorial side of the weekly are quite strict for most newcomers, there are also some amazing and talented newcomers among them. The comic manuscripts you bring will naturally stand out from them. It's just that whether those new cartoonists are just a flash in the pan or they have become new popular cartoonists, in addition to talent, what is more important is the persistence and hard work in the later period. Although he only has to be responsible for 2 cartoonists, Makoto Takahashi and Little Sea Otter, it doesn't mean that Yoshida's current job is easy. In addition to occasionally taking charge of some master-level cartoonists, Yoshida also needs to participate in observing and reviewing the manga manuscripts of some new cartoonists. What's more, neither Takahashi Makoto nor Little Sea Otter are worry-free goods. At least Yoshida has expressed in public more than once that he is envious of the 2 cartoonists under editor Hattori, namely the obedient and hard-working Aya. Shiraki Yumha is a good gay friend group, and Shizuka who stays at home and concentrates on completing the manga manuscript. The reason why Yoshida didn't pay attention to Takahashi Makoto's uncharacteristic reminder today is that he naturally has considerable confidence. On the one hand, as the editor-in-chief of the weekly editorial side, Yoshida has observed a large number of manga manuscripts, and is an industry veteran who is extremely familiar with various plots, therefore, he can make people cry in just a few words. Yoshida said that he had read the comics, but the number of those comics could only be described as a drop in the ocean among the comic manuscripts he had observed. As for the other aspect, although the plot of the comic One Punch Man is a little weird, generally speaking, it should be classified as a passionate fighting comic, which is the King-Wei comic that once made a good gay group resentful for a long time. This kind of comic will definitely have plots that make people cry, but judging from the previous serialization of this comic, how can a comic with this comic style make people cry? Yoshida said that he really hasn't even thought about it. So, to sum it up simply, Chen, you really underestimate me as the editor-in-charge. After Yoshida successfully took over the manga manuscript, he sat on the sofa in a quite comfortable posture, ready to start observing the manga manuscript in his hand. However, before the observation, Yoshida first weighed the manga manuscript in his hand, and did not start flipping through it in a hurry. Instead, he said to Takahashi Makoto in a serious tone, "Chen, I am requesting you again as a friend and editor-in-charge, please don't stay up late to finish the manga. If this happens again, I will ask the editor-in-chief of the bottle to let you take a break for a while on the grounds that it affects your health." "Oh? It's just a cat belonging to me." Makoto Takahashi raised his eyebrows and looked at Yoshida with interest. Unknowingly, he has begun to have a rebellious heart and awakened the power in his body. Rebellion factor. Huh? "Hey Chen, I'm just thinking about you." The kind reminder was met with cynicism. If Yoshida hadn't already known the true nature of a certain middle-class cartoonist, he might have started to enter the stage of rampage roar mode now. Very good, very good. Then keep the worry and hatred in your heart now, and continue the twisted struggle in the darkness. When the darkness corrupts your heart and despair fills your soul, you have the qualifications to kill me. Makoto Takahashi looked at Yoshida with a look that said, "I like you very much," and said words that made Yoshida familiar and speechless. "When that moment comes, your tragedy will be over, and let me bury your sinful life. Before we talk about this." Yoshida raised his hand and raised the manga manuscript in his hand, and said to Takahashi Makoto with some helplessness, "Speaking of Chen, these manga manuscripts seem to have far exceeded the content of one chapter required for weekly serialization." "Right. Well, the manga manuscript in your hand, my familiar cat, should be the content of 4 chapters to be precise." Makoto Takahashi said the rather incredible fact in a matter-of-fact tone. "4, what's the content of chapter 4? Yoshida looked at Makoto Takahashi in surprise. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly asked inexplicably, "Chen, do you have a fever? Why did you draw so many manga manuscripts in one go?" "Huh. Although I am very happy that you have completed so many comic manuscripts in a short period of time, but you didn't work hard to this extent, right?" "Huh? My beloved cat, what are you going to say? Is this level of desperate effort? My good friend Yachin Mumenjai will cry if he finds out." Makoto Takahashi took out the last issue of the weekly magazine and turned it to in the serialization part of the comic Go Soul. He sighed to Yoshida, "You must know that Mr. Huangmao Glasses is writing the comic plot while enduring the beatings and killings of CG and I in Go. Physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, soul trauma, to push yourself to that level in order to create comics. In a sense, the man with yellow hair and glasses is the most desperate, right?" I suddenly sympathize with Takagi-kun. After hearing the news revealed by Makoto Takahashi inadvertently, Yoshida's mouth twitched, but looking at the manga manuscript in his hand, Yoshida suddenly reacted and asked with some uncertainty. Makoto Takahashi asked, "Chen, you said before that the manga manuscript was not completed, but that was actually a lie. It's not that you didn't complete the manga manuscript required for the serialization, but that you didn't complete this short plot, right?" "Yes, my beloved cat, have you finally come to your senses?" Makoto Takahashi looked matter-of-fact, which made Yoshida feel a little painful in a place he couldn't describe. This 4-chapter comic draft is a complete story, and it is also my favorite plot in this comic. So my dependent is cat. Hey, I get it. You can observe the complete story, so you have to always be grateful to the demon god Phoenix Academy, right? I know, Yoshida, who has been the editor-in-chief of Makoto Takahashi for many years. Naturally I know what Makoto Takahashi wants to say. But speaking of Aiken, don't you usually like to deliberately stick the plot in key parts? Why did you change your past habit this time? Huh? My beloved is a cat. Who would do such a heartbreaking and immoral thing? You are making a false accusation. It is absolutely a false accusation. Makoto Takahashi's defense was only met with ridicule and contemptuous eyes from a certain editor in charge. The reason why I finished the 4-chapter comic draft in one go, well, let me think about it. It seems that it is probably because of my interest. Yoshida felt that he should focus on observing the manga manuscript instead of continuing to waste time with Takahashi Makoto. Ignoring Makoto Takahashi, Yoshida had already begun to look through the manga manuscript in his hand. But when Yoshida saw the title Unyielding Justice, he suddenly felt an uncomfortable feeling in his heart, because Yoshida suddenly thought of the plot of the previous chapter, that is, Teacher Saitama saved the city but was treated as a sinner. That sadistic plot. If we still use a plot similar to the previous chapter, we must stop this guy Cheng at all costs, because if the same plot happens again, it will ruin this comic. And more importantly, if you treat Saitama-sensei in that way again, everyone will feel heartbroken. Yoshida suddenly felt a certain determination, and after leaving Makoto Takahashi aside, he began to immerse himself in observing the manga manuscript. As for Takahashi Makoto, with a smile called joy on his face, he silently walked to the piano. "My beloved cat, do you still remember your experience when observing the comic Clannad? Now it's time for you to experience the correct way of observing comics again." A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 566. As the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine, Yoshida is very confident in his speed of observing comics because he needs to review a large number of comics. Moreover, this time, Makoto Takahashi took out 4 chapters of comics at once, and Yoshida finally didn't have to endure the torture of a certain middle school cartoonist's poor taste of getting stuck at the critical moment. Taiwan Novel Network Rightward Arrow. However, Yoshida, who quickly read the first chapter of the comic in his hand, did not rush to observe the rest of the comics. Instead, he sorted out the comics while frowning and thinking, because Yoshida felt that the comic he had just observed was not as exciting or interesting as he imagined. The content of the first chapter of the comic begins with Saitama teacher punching an octopus-shaped monster. The octopus monster that emerged from the sea appeared in the city where humans lived and destroyed and killed people. However, he was encountered by Saitama, who was returning home from shopping. Then, before the octopus monster could finish his arrogant words, he was killed by Saitama with one punch. Although Saitama's powerful strength has been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people in the previous serialization, every time Yoshida observed Saitama showing his one-punch invincible strength, he still couldn't help but sigh and marvel. Later, the octopus monster that was beaten by Saitama led to the subsequent plot of the comics, the invasion of the Deep Sea Tribe. The Deep Sea Tribe comes from the deep sea. They are a group of huge fish monsters. They regard humans as food and try to become the overlord of the world. The octopus monster that was killed by Saitama with one punch before can only be regarded as a sentinel sent by the Deep Sea Tribe. Led by the monster Deep Sea King, the fish-shaped monsters of the Deep Sea Clan broke out of the sea and appeared in the coastal cities where humans lived, killing humans wantonly and destroying the cities wantonly. At the same time, the Hero Association issued an evacuation order while summoning nearby heroes to solve the disaster. Just as the saying "heroes emerge in troubled times" says, whenever humans face disasters, there will always be some talented humans who stand up, either turning the tide with their own strength, or fighting the disaster with their talents. Just when humans were facing persecution from the Deep Sea Clan, the A-level hero Stinger affiliated with the Hero Association stood up and stood in front of the Deep Sea Clan, blocking the invasion of the Deep Sea Clan monsters. Before the A-class hero Stinger fought against the Deep Sea monsters, he once boasted that he would annihilate all without any injuries. Even though he later used his favorite gun Bamboo Shoot and his ultimate move Supergiant Spiral Stinger to eliminate 10 huge deep sea monsters, he did not achieve the state of annihilating all without any injuries. Instead, he was beaten black and blue in the battle. When seeing this part of the plot, Yoshida curled his lips in silence. Is this Makoto Takahashi's alternative way of making people laugh? At this time, should Makoto Takahashi be reminded to study funny comics carefully, or should he boast about the unique design of a certain middle school cartoonist for funny plots? Being able to kill 10 huge deep sea monsters by himself, from this point of view, the A-level hero Stinger still has a certain strength. However, this A-level hero Stinger who stood up at the critical moment was completely powerless when facing the king of the Deep Sea Tribe, Deep Sea King, and was killed instantly by the opponent. Yes, the A-level hero Stinger who suddenly burst into a killing spree just now was killed instantly by the monster Deep Sea King, and the first chapter of the comic manuscript in Yoshida's hand just ended here. From the beginning to the end, except for the appearance of Saitama teacher as a passerby at the beginning, the content of the entire chapter revolves around the deep sea monsters. However, it is this kind of plot that makes Yoshida frown more and more. When Yoshida heard his colleague Yujiro convey the prediction of cartoonist side great prophet Nazuma Eiji, he was still a little surprised. Because Yoshida didn't expect that Eiji Nazuma would give such an exaggerated evaluation, and in order to compete with Makoto Takahashi, he tore up the comics he had already completed. But when Yoshida finished reading the content of this episode, he was a little disappointed. Although the style of the battle scenes in this episode of the comics is the same as those serialized in the previous comics, it is still as sharp and powerful as ever, but this alone cannot conceal the routine of the comics itself. This setting of a stronger enemy will appear after defeating the enemy is the mainstream of the Kingly Way comics in the weekly magazines today, which is more in line with the expectations of most readers, but for a responsible editor who has observed a large number of comics, it is a little disappointing. Is the development of this plot really what Eiji Nazuma expected, and is it also the plot that Makoto Takahashi likes and values the most? Yoshida feels that he may have seen a fake comic. In terms of the depiction of the battle scenes, the painting skills displayed by Makoto Takahashi in this One Punch Man comic have indeed surpassed the level of many cartoonists. As for the development of the plot, even though this development is a bit cliché, it has to be admitted that this old-fashioned plot does have the support of many readers. But just based on these, Yoshida does not think it is worth it for Eiji Nazuma to prepare for the battle. Of course, it cannot be said that the comic draft of this episode has no highlights. At least the only thing that Yoshida is looking forward to is how fierce the battle will be between this powerful monster Deep Sea King and Saitama teacher in the next plot. So, Is it because I have too high expectations for Aiken, or for this comic? Yoshida frowned and thought hard while sorting out the comic manuscript. Speaking of which, the reason why Aiken drew the content of this episode like this, could it be that? Just when Yoshida couldn't help but want to question Takahashi Makoto, a responsible editor suddenly thought of another possibility. Aiken, that guy, is he planning to use the content of a whole episode to pave the way for the subsequent plot? Saitama teacher is very strong, no matter what kind of monster, he only needs one punch to solve it. However, it is precisely because of this that readers don't know how strong Saitama teacher is, because this cannot be directly expressed through comics. How to judge the strength of the characters in the comics? The best way is naturally to show it through a battle. The A-class hero of the Hero Association was killed by the monster Deep Sea King in one move, which is enough to show the powerful strength of Deep Sea King. Then if Saitama teacher defeated this Deep Sea King with one punch, does it mean that Saitama teacher's strength is far beyond the so-called A-class hero? So this episode doesn't seem to be a very colorful plot, it's just a deliberate foreshadowing for the content later, just a foreshadowing to show Saitama teacher's strength. Yoshida, who thought more and more that there was such a possibility, couldn't help but exclaimed, "Tisk, a whole episode of content to lay the groundwork. Ah Cheng, that guy, is really bold. Isn't he worried that this will affect the performance of the comics?" Just when Yoshida was about to verify his guess and carefully observed the remaining comics, he suddenly heard the sound of a piano. Yoshida looked up and saw a middle school cartoonist sitting in front of the piano, falling into a state of self-absorption, concentrating on playing an unknown piece of music. Then, a responsible editor went into a rage. "I was thinking hard about the shortcomings of the comics and how to improve the quality of the comics. I finally figured out the intention of setting up the comics in this way. It would be fine if Takahashi Makoto didn't remind me earlier, he actually had the leisure to play the piano over there. But, damn it, if I can beat him." Yoshida has already started mumbling, is this the embodiment of the legendary blackening? Speaking of having the delusion of using force to teach Takahashi Makoto to be a new person, Yoshida, it's getting late, you should go to bed. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 567. Now that it has been speculated that Makoto Takahashi will use an entire chapter to prepare the ground, Yoshida will naturally concentrate on observing the next manga draft. As for someone who has fallen into a state of complete selflessness and is playing the piano, as a middle-class cartoonist, Yoshida will not ask for trouble, and just choose to ignore it completely. Just as Yoshida guessed, the role of the A-level hero is only to highlight the powerful strength of the weirdo Deep Sea King, so after the hero Stinger was instantly killed, another hero Lightning Max appeared. It is a pity that the new hero is facing the powerful Deep Sea King. Since the A-level hero Stinger cannot defeat it, naturally this new A-level hero is also no match. Therefore, in the comic manuscript of the second chapter, not much space was spent describing the battle between the A-class hero Lightning Max and the weirdo Deep Sea King. Because the two are not on the same level at all. So, after Stinger, the second A-level hero Lightning Max who appeared just came out to make soy sauce, and was sent back to his hometown to get married by the weirdo Deep Sea King. It should be Mr. Saitama's turn next, right? After all, two A-level heroes have been used to pave the way, and we can already confirm the power of the weirdo Deep Sea King. Yoshida was flipping through the manga manuscript, holding his chin and thinking silently. Get up, and Saitama-sensei, the hero who has just been promoted to the second place in C-class, makes a strong appearance and defeats the powerful weirdo king of Deep Sea. Tisk, tisk, this kind of plot of pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger is a bit cliché, but it is exactly the same. What readers have come to expect. As expected by Yoshida, teacher Saitama did appear in the following plot, but to Yoshida's surprise or helplessness, the comic plot has already developed to the point where the weirdo Deep Sea King defeated two A-level heroes. And Saitama-sensei and Genos, two powerful beings, are actually still on their way to the scene of the incident. I originally thought that Chen would actually discover the plot this time, but it turns out that the real attraction is in the comics. Although he had already seen the characters he longed to appear, Yoshida was not as surprised as he imagined. So happy, tisk, Chen knows that everyone is looking forward to Mr. Saitama's appearance and confronting King of Deep Sea, but he deliberately named Mr. Saitama in the comic as he is still on the way. Phew. I don't expect that from Chen. Those who misbehave no longer have bad tastes. I am so naive to have such illusions. Complaints are complaints. Yoshida also knows that the setting is a very good choice for the comic itself, at least even Yoshida himself, as the editor-in-chief, is very curious about the next plot direction of the comic. If even A-level heroes can't stop Deep Sea King. Even though Yoshida had already guessed it, after actually seeing the character appearing in the comic manuscript, he still couldn't help but be surprised and sighed again. This is really a big deal. I actually chose an S-class hero. 2 A-class heroes plus an S-class hero, use these to show off the strength of Saitama-sensei. The progress of the monster Deep Sea King was blocked again. This time, the ones who intercepted it were Sonic, who had previously regarded Mr. Saitama as his old enemy, and the S-class hero Sexy Prisoner who had escaped from prison. Although the bizarre setting of this S-class hero made Yoshida complain endlessly when he was observing the manga draft, the complaints came naturally. Soon a certain editor was immersed in the weirdo Deep Sea King and the S-class hero Sexy Prisoner. In the comic manuscript of the duel, as for the plot about the C-class hero undocumented knight rushing to the scene of the incident that was added midway, Yoshida did not pay much attention. The fierce fight with fists and fists, the back and forth blows from both sides, the changes that occur when the muscles are severely injured, even though Yoshida has observed many manga manuscripts, at this moment, he has to sigh again. Takahashi Makoto is here in a comic called One Punch Man. The style of painting when depicting battles will indeed make people addicted without knowing it. But the only thing that makes Yoshida feel a little helpless or depressed is that the showdown between the weirdo Deep Sea King and the S-class hero Sexy Prisoner is obviously about the life and death of mankind. It is obviously a very serious battle, but the result is because of a certain S-class hero. Various funny dialogues, as well as various shameless moves that abandon moral integrity, make the duel between the two full of humor and prank. But with the development of the plot, were my previous assumptions wrong? Looking at the Sexy Prisoner who fought evenly with Deep Sea King in the comic manuscript, Yoshida frowned and whispered softly, could it be that Aiken is actually do you plan to use this weirdo Deep Sea King to show the combat power of the S-class heroes in the Hero Association? Otherwise, why would this powerful Deep Sea King only be able to fight with, After flipping through the next page of the comic manuscript, Yoshida realized that he had been tricked. Because in this comic manuscript, the S-class Sexy Prisoner who just suppressed the weirdo Deep Sea King with combos was blocked by Deep Sea King with both arms, and then used the same combo again. He punched him back, and was finally punched away. This was not the even match Yoshida thought at all. The strength of the weirdo King of the Deep Sea far exceeded the combat power of the S-class hero. Even S-class heroes can't, Damn it, Yoshida, who was still sighing at first, immediately exclaimed after seeing the follow-up content of the comic manuscript. This is really what comics can show, it's awesome. It's awesome. What amazed Yoshida was not the plot of Sonic the Hedgehog vs. Deep Sea King, but the painting skills shown in the comics. Sonic the Hedgehog, who has always regarded Saitama as his nemesis, has a very fast speed. This information has been revealed through narration or inner monologue in previous series. But how fast is Sonic the Hedgehog? Just relying on the two brief battles with Saitama teacher at the beginning, even though it left a certain impression on people, it still cannot be perfectly demonstrated. However, in the comics of this episode, when Sonic the Hedgehog faced Deep Sea King, the battle scene on the street in the rain made Yoshida, the editor in charge of observing and reviewing the comics, dumbfounded. In many comics, in order to show the speed of a character's movement, either the scene is switched to allow the character to teleport from one place to another, or the character's movement speed is directly shown by drawing many afterimages of the character. Most cartoonists will choose the former method, because although the latter method looks very exciting, it will also make the comics look a bit messy due to the use of too many lines. However, in this episode, Takahashi Makoto chose the latter method, showing the speed of Sonic through the scene that appeared when Sonic dodged the fist of Deep Sea King, and most importantly, whether it is the afterimage when Sonic moves or the processing of the lines, there is no sense of messiness, but Yoshida has a strong sense of dynamic vision. It doesn't matter if the plot is relatively bad. Yoshida's eyes were full of surprise. Just relying on such painting skills, Aiken's content in this episode will definitely be well received. As for the battle between the monster Deep Sea King and Sonic Speed. Ahem, at this moment, a certain editor in charge is still immersed in the superb painting skills displayed by a certain middle school comic. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 568. Sonic did not defeat the monster Deep Sea King in the end, but left early in the middle of the battle. Although Yoshida felt a little regretful that the two could not tell the winner in the manga manuscript, a certain editor was still very pleased with the duel that interpreted Speed. Although at the beginning, Yoshida was quite critical of the development of the comic plot that he had observed, but after watching the short battle between Sonic and Deep Sea King, Yoshida already felt that it didn't matter. So what if the comic plot is cliché? Even if it is a cliched plot, with such a sharp painting style, it can still bring excitement to readers who observe comics. What's more, being able to present that kind of cliched plot with such a powerful painting style makes the comic not only not dragged down by the cliched plot, but also becomes more exciting. In a sense, being able to do this, a cartoonist of this level is already quite an amazing existence. Although he was also distractedly observing the manga manuscript, because most of Yoshida's thoughts were still immersed in the previous duel, the efficiency of a certain editor in reviewing and observing the manga manuscript began to decline. Of course, this was just a moment of distraction. That's all. Please don't doubt Yoshida's sense of responsibility as the editor-in-chief. As Yoshida flips through the manga manuscripts faster, the plot of the manga becomes more and more exciting. Deep Sea King did not continue to pursue Sonic, who left early, but turned his target to the large number of humans hiding in the shelter. At the same time, Genos also rushed towards the shelter because he noticed the energy fluctuations emitted by Deep Sea King during the previous battle. The walls of the so-called indestructible shelter were easily broken open by Deep Sea King. Of course, this does not mean that the shelter is a shoddy project. It can only be said that Deep Sea King is too powerful. Humans who originally thought they were safe hiding in the shelter could not help but tremble after seeing the huge Deep Sea King break through the wall. Some of them even tried to beg Deep Sea King for mercy. However, Deep Sea King has no intention of letting go of the humans hiding in the refuge. It intends to kill all the humans in the refuge. The reason why he wants to kill humans is because this weirdo king of the deep sea likes to listen to the cries of humans in despair and death. Like the cries of despair and death of human beings. Tisk, that's a really bad interest. Why do I feel that the character of this king of the deep sea makes me feel inexplicably familiar? Yoshida, he raised his head and secretly glanced at Makoto Takahashi, who was playing the piano over there. Just when he was about to complain about Makoto Takahashi based on the evil character of King of Deep Sea, he was interrupted by a sudden change in the piano music. Out of his body's instinct, after feeling Ling Lai's coldness again, Yoshida decisively swallowed the words that came to his lips, then pretended to try to change the subject, and sighed softly. Wrong, is it an illusion? Well, it must be because I haven't been there recently. You have to sleep well to have this kind of illusion, right? After all, this kind of evil existence based on the pain of others, can only appear in comics. As soon as Yoshida's emotional words fell, the piano music that had just been intense and filled with a sense of murder suddenly became gentle and gentle. Although Takahashi Makoto has been silent since he started playing the piano, but since the piano music just now's transformation, Yoshida knew that a certain middle-class cartoonist had actually been staring at him. To celebrate my success in escaping, Yoshida, who was still frightened, muttered in his heart while soothing his emotions, I must treat myself well after I go back today. Affected by the murderous intention that had just suddenly appeared and disappeared inexplicably, Yoshida accelerated the review of the manga manuscript, because a certain editor felt that it was quite insecure to observe the manga manuscript next to Makoto Takahashi. At the critical moment when the weirdo Deep Sea King was about to start killing people, Genos finally arrived at the shelter. This time the battle between Deep Sea King and Genos was not brushed off like the previous battles. Makoto Takahashi spent a lot of space describing this battle. Yoshida was still regretting that he could not get enough of the battle between Sonic and Deep Sea King. Now after seeing the battle between Genos and Deep Sea King, a certain editor is finally satisfied. This time, the battle between Deep Sea King and Genos was not decided in a brief moment like the previous one where Deep Sea King killed the heroes belonging to the Heroes Association. Instead, the two sides went back and forth. The fists and kicks met each other. In the moment of rapid fighting, there was a sudden stagnation due to the competition between the mutual forces, and then it returned to the back and forth fighting mode again. Well, the monster king of Deep Sea has already transformed into the second stage, and Genos can compete with him to this extent. If Genos alone can defeat the monster king of Deep Sea, then that means Saitama-sensei will not have to appear. Yoshida flipped through the manga manuscript with some surprise, but he was a little worried in his heart. If the plot of the manga really develops like this, and Saitama-sensei does not appear to have a head-on confrontation with Deep Sea King, this kind of the plot will make readers feel depressed. Although Yoshida noticed this problem, he did not tell Takahashi Makoto immediately. It was not because of the fear of disturbing Takahashi Makoto would bring misfortune, but because Yoshida learned from the painful black history in the past that comics, especially comics by a certain middle school cartoonist, should never be evaluated prematurely based on the experience of the editor-in-chief. Sure enough, the subsequent plot development of the comic One Punch Man was just as Yoshida expected, and Genos did not beat the monster Deep Sea King. According to the current plot serialized in the comic manuscript, Genos has indeed reached the level of being evenly matched with Deep Sea King. Although Genos lost one hand in the battle with Deep Sea King, he also did something that even S-level heroes had not done before, that is, smashing the monster Deep Sea King's mouth. However, when Genos was fighting against Deep Sea King, in order to protect the little girl who was cheering on him from being corroded by the acid spit out by Deep Sea King, Genos used his body to block the little girl. So, Genos, who had been fighting with Deep Sea King on equal terms before, was beaten to the point of death by Deep Sea King with this somewhat rogue move, and fell into a state of being unable to fight. Although I vaguely guessed that this would be the development, I still feel a little pity. Looking at the comic draft, Genos was corroded by acid and only part of his body was left. Yoshida sighed helplessly, and his face quickly switched to an expectant look. Then it should be Saitama teacher who will appear next. I wonder how Chen will describe the battle scene in the next battle between Saitama teacher and Deep Sea King. The three major illusions in life are actually rooted in the expectation of the unknown future, but what happens in the future does not develop as expected. Just like Yoshida was looking forward to a fierce duel between Saitama and Deep Sea King, but the reality is, in the comic, in the rainstorm, the chin of Deep Sea King healed quickly. Even though he was beaten to the point where he couldn't fight, the monster Deep Sea King didn't intend to let Genos go this time, and was ready to perform the legendary finishing blow. Heroes always appear at critical moments. Observing the development of the plot in the comics, Yoshida complained helplessly, the next plot can be guessed. Genos can't be killed by Deep-Sea King just like that, but he was saved by Saitama teacher who suddenly appeared at the critical moment, at Justice Crash, just when Deep-Sea King was about to kill Genos, a sudden bicycle hit it. It seems that Yoshida guessed the beginning of the plot this time, but he failed to guess the subsequent development of the comics plot, because in the comics, it was not the bald Saitama teacher who stopped the monster Deep-Sea King from killing Genos, but a character who seemed to be a passerby who had appeared several times before. Justice Bicyclist, unlicensed writer, come on. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 569. After seeing that the character who appeared in the comic was not the Saitama teacher he had expected, but the sea-level hero unlicensed knight who had been a soy sauce character in the entire comic series, Yoshida felt bad. According to the classification of its affiliated heroes by the Hero Association, Yoshida naturally knew that the so-called sea-level heroes were not a great existence at all, and were similar to ordinary people, especially in the previous series. A scumbag vest among the sea-level heroes left readers with extremely hateful memories. As for the combat effectiveness of sea-level heroes, except for Saitama teacher, who is at the level of outside of human, most sea-level heroes can be regarded as the level of 5 scum, not to mention that the previous monster Deep-Sea King had even crippled the S-level heroes. So what is a mere sea-level hero unlicensed knight in front of the monster Deep-Sea King? This C-rank hero unlicensed knight, could he be the same as Mr. Saitama? Don't blame Yoshida for having such doubts. After all, those who can stand up and directly confront the monster Deep-Sea King at this time, except for those humans who have been forced into a desperate situation, I'm afraid that normal guys don't have this courage, right? Yes, after knowing the strength of the monster Deep-Sea King, he can still stand in front of the other party as a hero. Let's not talk about whether he has the strength to compete with him, just with such courage, the actions of the hero unlicensed knight are enough to move people. According to common sense, the existence of so-called courage is mostly based on the strength it possesses. In current terms, it takes capital to pretend. So when Yoshida saw the hero unlicensed knight standing in front of the monster Deep-Sea King, he had such an unscientific feeling that unlicensed knight is the second bald Saitama. Like Yoshida, the humans in the shelter in the comics are both expectant and uneasy. After seeing the appearance of unlicensed knight, although everyone was looking forward to this new hero being able to defeat the monster Deep-Sea King and save everyone from danger, based on the previous fierce battle between Deep-Sea King and Genos, the humans in the shelter also knew very well that this sea-level hero could not defeat a monster as strong as Deep-Sea King. Humans are like this. When struggling in the dark abyss, they will not give up as long as there is a glimmer of hope in front of them. Even if it is just a thin spider silk, even if they know that they cannot get rid of the previous predicament, they will not help but grab it and climb up. Is this unlicensed knight here to make fun of me? Looking at the unlicensed knight in the comic draft, ignoring the warning of the half-crippled Genos, and rushing towards Deep-Sea King with full momentum, Yoshida, who was originally looking forward to a magical plot twist, saw that the hero unlicensed knight's full-strength attack was easily taken by the opponent, and began to play the Hulk throw play used by the Hulk when bullying Loki. After that, a certain responsible editor showed a look of "I knew it would be like this" on his face, and he laughed and complained in a low voice. Although Yoshida also expected the hero unlicensed knight to counterattack the monster Deep-Sea King, according to the content of the comic draft, as he had guessed, the hero unlicensed knight was no match for the monster Deep-Sea King. Without paying attention to the unlicensed knight who was tossed away by him, the monster Deep-Sea King turned his eyes to the already injured Genos again. When Yoshida saw the murderous Deep-Sea King in the comic draft preparing to kill Genos, although he knew that Genos would not die, and although he had guessed that Saitama teacher would appear to kill Deep-Sea King next, he still swallowed his saliva subconsciously because of worry. Justice Grab, the hero unlicensed knight who had just been caught by the monster Deep-Sea King, regardless of the blood on his face, hugged Deep Sea King again with his scarred body and blocked Genos. Although the unlicensed knight looked quite embarrassed at this moment in the comic draft, this time, Yashida did not laugh again, let alone make any complaints. Huh, the face of the monster Deep Sea King changed again, and then, slapped unlicensed knight away again. I know, no one expects me. The unlicensed knight who was hit hard again tried to stand up with his hands. C-class heroes are useless, I know this better than anyone. After being seriously injured, the unlicensed knight, whose physical strength had begun to decline significantly, tried twice in a row, and finally stood up again shakily. I can't do anything in B class, and I can't beat you, no one knows how weak I am better than me. Dragging his seriously injured body, he turned to face the monster Deep Sea King. But I can only do this, it's not a question of winning or not. He once again took a posture ready to fight. But I have to stand in front of you. Although he was just observing the comics, the intermittent monologue of unlicensed knight, combined with the gentle and slightly sad piano sound, made Yashida feel a sense of blood boiling, and he even seemed to be able to hear the will and determination of unlicensed knight in the comics that moved the world. And come on. Come on, undocumented rider. Come on, big brother on bicycles. Kill the Deep Sea Clan, come on. The little boy hiding in the shelter began to support the undocumented rider while crying. Come on. That's right, come on. Kill it. It's all up to you, undocumented knight. Come on. Win. Ah, with the little boy's support, like a chain reaction, the humans in the shelter also began to support the undocumented knight hoarsely. The whole group cheered excitedly, causing the undocumented knight to shout. With a roar that could shake the world, he punched the weirdo Deep Sea King again. Then, without any surprise, the hero undocumented knight was punched away by the weirdo Deep Sea King again. After being silent for about a second, Yashida immediately let out an earth-shattering roar. At this time, shouldn't the undocumented knight directly explode and kill the Deep Sea King? This kind of divine turn is so dull. Give me back all the emotions I just felt. Yashida's three-part complaint, it's been a long time coming. After seeing the undocumented knight who was knocked flying and being caught by Saitama in the manga manuscript, Yashida had no intention of continuing to observe the manga manuscript. It's not because of the twists and turns in the comic manuscript that Yashida has no interest in continuing to observe, but because as the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine, Yashida knows very well that his uneasy mentality at this time can easily affect him. Next, review and observation of the comic manuscript. After all, this part of the plot I watched before, apart from the deceptive twist in the later stage, is indeed very powerful. At least Yashida at this moment. The excited heart can't calm down. No wonder Eiji Niizuma would give such a comment. Yashida slowly calmed down while commenting on the plot of the manga manuscript he had just read. The scene in the manga manuscript has a magical appeal, especially with the gentle piano music. Piano. Yashida finally noticed something was wrong. He looked up and saw the smiling face of Makoto Takahashi over there. No, what's more deserving of a slap on the wrist is probably the behavior of a certain middle-level cartoonist holding a mobile phone that seems to be filming or recording at this moment. Oh, my beloved cat, that expression is great. If you sell it to little sea otters, you might get unexpected gains. Makoto Takahashi raised his phone with a devilish smile on his face. After all, little sea otters, Mr. Sea Otter has been oppressed by my beloved cat you all the year round. If I provide you with a little help, you might do something interesting such as rebellion. Tisk, Yashida spat with a look of displeasure on his face. A certain editor said that he was too obsessed with manga manuscripts, so he seemed to have forgotten about a certain middle-class cartoonist who was full of bad taste. My beloved cat, your performance this time is very good. The words were like praising a child, making Yashida's face instantly filled with black lines. Makoto Takahashi noticed the change in Yoshida's face, and his smile became even brighter. I promised before that I wouldn't cry or anything. Hey, although he wanted to retort that he was not crying, the cold feeling brought by the tears running down his cheeks made Yoshida swallow back the words that came to his lips. Yeah, it's a good thing to shed tears to express gratitude. Looking at Yoshida's aggrieved expression, Takahashi Makoto nodded with satisfaction, being able to observe the comic manuscripts with exciting plots, listening to the piano performance of His Majesty the Fierce Demon King of the Phoenix Academy. My beloved cat, you must imprint today's kindness deep in your memory and engraved in your soul, and never forget it forever. I was moved because the plot of the manga manuscript is quite brilliant, and it has nothing to do with the piano music you just played, Cheng. Yoshida looked at the proud smile of a middle-grade cartoonist and almost gritted his teeth and said, it has nothing to do with it at all. Is that really like this? Makoto Takahashi squinted his right eye and looked at Yoshida, tapping the piano keys lightly with his fingers. I see, it seems that you, my beloved cat, did not obey my will. Go carefully and observe the cartoon manuscript. How is it possible? When others doubted his professional ethics as an editor, Yoshida was naturally furious. The evidence is sympathy. Makoto Takahashi looked at Yoshida's confused look and nodded with satisfaction. This is a theory specifically mentioned in the comic Railgun. Don't tell me you don't know. I'd better continue reading the manga manuscript. Yoshida, the brief silence before you picked up the manga manuscript, was it a guilty conscience or a guilty conscience? Hey, my beloved cat. Seeing Yoshida planning to enter the observer mode again, Takahashi Makoto spoke first. What are you doing? Yoshida was naturally quite unhappy when someone interrupted his interest in observing the manga manuscript. What do you think of the manga manuscript for Chapter 4? Although I haven't finished watching it yet, this part of the plot of The Undocumented Knight is indeed very good. Is it just a very good review? Any dissatisfaction with the content of this 4-part episode? I, the arrogant manga artist Hohoin Koshin, will fulfill my agreement with the new commander. The agreement with the editor-in-chief of Bottle? Is it? Let Undocumented Knight's unyielding justice reach the pinnacle that all cartoonists can only look up to. I have been writing this chapter over and over again, and no matter how I write it, I am not satisfied. I am slightly satisfied with today's chapter. I am sorry, dear readers, I was just being willful. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 570. According to the weekly serialization rules, the content of 4 episodes is enough to serialize for a whole month. After the comic One Punch Man began serializing The Deep Sea King, Yujiro spent a whole month very depressed. And the cause of all this is naturally the cartoonist Eiji Niizuma under his command. Of course, the editor-in-chief Yujiro has always felt that from another perspective, the cartoonist Howin Kyoma is the real culprit. Eiji Niizuma, who was evaluated as a genius cartoonist by the editor, did not get complacent because of this evaluation, nor did he give up his efforts because of this honor. However, this hard-working genius Eiji Niizuma, in completing the serialized comic manuscripts recently, although he has not reached the level of slackness, but Yujiro can feel that this cartoonist under his command seems to spend too much time observing the comic manuscripts. From the first week, Yujiro discovered that his cartoonist, Eiji Niizuma, spent most of his time on completing the cartoon manuscript on observing the One Punch Man cartoon. If this phenomenon only lasted for a few days, Yujiro would not say anything. After all, no matter how talented a cartoonist is, he is still a human being in essence. Besides, for someone like Eiji Niizuma, Yujiro would not think there is anything wrong with him being lazy occasionally. But he did this almost every day for a whole month. This made Yujiro unable to sit idly by. I say, Niizuma-kun. Yujiro came to Niizuma Eiji's studio and saw Niizuma Eiji squatting on a chair observing the weekly magazine that was released before. He was inexplicably depressed. Are you still in the mood to read comics at this time? Of course. Because Howin's comic One Punch Man is super exciting, Nyaizuma Eiji stared at the comic in his hand, without even raising his head. Yujiro-san, the comic manuscript for serialization has been placed on the table. Nyaizuma-kun, let's not talk about the comic manuscript for now. Yujiro felt that he needed to have a good chat with Nyaizuma Eiji. Recently, whenever you finish the comic manuscript, you start to read the previous serialized content of the comic One Punch Man repeatedly, and even waste your rest time. Because Mr. Howin's One Punch Man is super interesting, after changing to a sitting position that he thought was comfortable but others thought was extremely awkward, Eiji Nizumo looked down at the comic and casually perfunctorily said to Yujiro, compared to sleeping and other things, reading interesting comics is more important. Nizuma-kun, didn't you say before that you wanted to compete with Mr. Howin-kuma? Seeing Eiji Nyazuma's obsessive behavior, Yujiro hesitated for a moment, but couldn't help but say, instead of reading the comic One Punch Man repeatedly, it's better to think of some interesting plots. But Mr. Howin's One Punch Man is super interesting. Nyaizuma Eiji held the comic in both hands and said without raising his head, and the skills shown by Mr. Howin in the recent serialization are very powerful. I also know that the plot of the comic One Punch Man is very interesting. Yujiro will have the completed. He put the comic manuscript of My Hero Academy into his bag, and then stared at Eiji Nyaizuma seriously, but Nyaizuma-kun, you keep watching the comic One Punch Man over and over again, don't you feel bored? No, because Howin-sensei's comics are very interesting. Do you think comics can be watched repeatedly just because they are interesting? No matter how wonderful the comic manuscript is, as long as you watch it 2 or 3 times, you can almost remember the content and plot in your head, so Yujiro can't understand Eiji Nyazuma's abnormal behavior at all. I even speeded up the process of completing my comics because I wanted to have more time to read comics. Is it really necessary to do this? It is necessary. Because Howin's comics are very interesting. Seeing that Nizuma Eiji kept emphasizing the point that comics are interesting, Yujiro, who had a look of being annoyed, had given up the idea of continuing to question Nizuma Eiji. Because Yujiro was sure that according to Nizuma Eiji's current level of obsession, no matter what he asked next, the other party would definitely answer with Howin's comics are very interesting. And there was another reason why Yujiro didn't say anything to show his presence. After putting away the comics, Yujiro handed the weekly magazine containing the 4th episode of the comic One Punch Man Unyielding Justice to Nizuma Eiji. Oh, is this the weekly magazine released today? The 4th chapter of One Punch Man Unyielding Justice, I've been looking forward to it for a long time. Nizuma Eiji didn't mean to be polite at all, he took the weekly magazine and started to read it impatiently. Nizuma-kun, take a closer look at the content of this comic One Punch Man. I think. After a slight hesitation, Yujiro swallowed back what he wanted to say before. Oh, forget it. After you finish reading it, you should understand what I want to say. Oh, although it's just a C-class hero, the performance of Unlicensed Knight is very cool. Nizuma Eiji wiped his tears and shouted in an extremely excited tone, come on. Beat the monster Deep Sea King. Oh. Listening to Nizuma Eiji's call, Yujiro didn't complain this time. After all, when Yujiro was observing this episode in the weekly editor's base camp, it seemed that he was more excited than Nizuma Eiji. But, Yujiro, it seems that Nizuma Eiji didn't hear what you just said, right? This part of the plot, Nizuma Eiji seemed to be confused about the plot in the comics, and he was no longer excited and excited. After seeing the change in the expression on Nizuma Eiji's face, Yujiro nodded secretly. The plot of the 4th episode of the comic One Punch Man Unyielding Justice serialized in this weekly magazine is also the reason why Yujiro chose to find Nizuma Eiji today. This part of the plot seems to be somewhat similar. Well, after all, they are both hero comics. Eiji Nyaizuma slowly flipped through the comic in his hand, but couldn't help muttering in a low voice, "No, it's different from my comic." Yujiro-san. Nyaizuma-kun, did you notice it too? Hearing Ag Nyaizuma's call, Yujiro pointed at the comic in the other's hand, and his expression became a little serious. The content of this chapter of Mr. Howin-kuma is somewhat similar to the plot of the second chapter of Your Hero Academia. No Izuku Midoriya, who has any ability, rushed to the bandit mud without hesitation because he wanted to save his classmate Bakugo Katsuki. Unlicensed knight, who can only be regarded as an ordinary person, stood in front of the monster deep-sea king who had defeated many heroes because he wanted to save the humans in the shelter and Genos who was unable to fight. Izuku Midoriya knew that he had no ability and knew that it would be useless even if he went up at this time, but his body had already acted involuntarily before thinking. Unlicensed knight knew that he was not expected and knew that he could not beat the monster deep-sea king, but it was not a question of winning or not, but he had to stand in front of deep-sea king. Izuku Midoriya and unlicensed knight, both are equally weak and ordinary, but equally great, and equally qualified to be called heroes. What really surprised Eiji Nyaizuma was the plot after the fourth episode of the comic One Punch Man Unyielding Justice. After indirectly helping Bakugo Katsuki, Izuku Midoriya did not receive recognition and praise from the crowd, but was criticized and taught a lesson by the group of powerless heroes before. And after unlicensed knight risked his life to resist the monster deep-sea king, he was ridiculed and mocked by some dark-minded humans. Izuku Midoriya finally got the recognition of the first hero. Unlicensed knight also gained the recognition of the protected humans under Saitama's self-defilement. It's just that the plot is somewhat similar. Nyaizuma Ag knew what Yujiro wanted to say, then he shook his head and said, "Yujiro-san, you know, Mr. Howin had already completed some of the comics for One Punch Man before I started to conceive Hero Academy, so it's not strange to use similar plots. After all, both comics are based on the theme of heroes." That's right, after all, it's natural for comics based on the theme of heroes to have similar plots. Yujiro was relieved to see that Nazuma Ag didn't dwell on it, but when he saw Nazuma Ag take out his phone and quickly after dialing a number, Yujiro's expression became a little strange, and he asked tentatively, "Hey, Nazuma-kun, who are you calling?" "Of course it's Mr. Howin." Nazuma Ag looked at Yujiro with a look of "You are really an idiot, although I am a little reluctant, but if you lose, you lose, just admit it frankly. Just win it back next time." Yujiro, at this time, just smile. "Moshi moshi Mr. Howin." Nazuma Ag squatted on the chair, without showing the frustrated look of a loser on his face. "Man, the fourth episode of One Punch Man is really exciting. Yeah, I lost this time. But next time, are we finally going to start drawing that? It's okay, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it." "Nazuma-kun, you." After Nazuma Ag hung up the phone, Yujiro couldn't help but ask because he was a little concerned about what he accidentally heard. "The that you just mentioned, is it the new manga?" Of course, Nazuma Ag didn't seem to have any sense of confidentiality. In Yujiro's unbelievable eyes, he admitted it very frankly. "Eh? But, Nazuma-kun, aren't you and Howin-kuma still serializing the manga now? And it's being double serialized in the monthly and weekly magazines at the same time." Yujiro felt like he was going crazy, and roared at Nazuma Ag in a somewhat inappropriate manner, "You are actually planning to start a new series now? Let me make it clear first, no matter how interesting the manga is, the editorial department will never agree to it." I know. But, Yujiro-san." In response to Yujiro's surprise, Nazuma Ag spread his hands helplessly. "According to Mr. Fengguangai Yuan, this is a punishment for losers. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 571. Even though he was once counterattacked by the good friend group of Yajomumha, and even though he was suppressed by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist many times, Nazuma Eiji did not waver in his beliefs, nor did he become evil because of being suppressed for many years. Instead, he became full of passion and enthusiasm. In short, Nazuma Eiji is such a person who does not give up easily. But even such a high-spirited Nazuma Eiji, after reading the serialized content of the fourth episode of One Punch Man Unyielding Justice, took the initiative to call Takahashi Makoto and told him frankly that he gave up this time. After sending off the editor-in-chief Yujiro, who was full of doubts and worries, Nazuma Eiji did not enter the state of excited cartoonist to complete the comic manuscript as he had done. Instead, he held the issue of the weekly magazine that Yujiro had just brought, squatted on a chair, flipped through the serialized comics of One Punch Man, and thought silently. Failure is not a shameful thing. Summarize the reasons for failure, absorb the lessons, and win again next time. Nazuma Eiji has always held this belief and has always done so. For a true genius, in addition to the so-called talent given by God, what is more important is to have a strong heart. Is it the plot? No, it should not be just a matter of the plot. What is the content of the fourth episode of the comic One Punch Man Unyielding Justice that made him lose so convincingly? Flipping through the comic in his hand again, Nazuma Eiji's brain is also thinking quickly. Editor-in-chief Yujiro said before that the content of the fourth episode of the manga One Punch Man Unyielding Justice is somewhat similar to the second episode of Eiji Naizuma's new manga Hero Academy. Compared to the editor-in-chief, Eiji Naizuma, as the original author of the manga, has seen more. A manga with the theme of heroes is naturally inseparable from the contest between justice and evil. This is a routine that almost all manga will adopt. Although this plot sounds a bit old-fashioned, it has to be said that this is also a classic plot. Just like Izuku Midoriya saved his classmates, Unlicensed Knight also sacrificed himself to try to save the humans who were about to be killed by Deep Sea King. Just from this part of the plot, Eiji Naizuma felt that he did not lose to Makoto Takahashi. After all, they are both ordinary people doing things not ordinary people can do. Although the plot of heroes always appear at critical moments is also adopted, it is not incomprehensible as a classic routine that has been passed down from ancient times to the present. What really surprised Eiji Naizuma was the next development of the manga. When Izuku Midoriya was in danger, he was saved by the first hero Oram and when Unlicensed Knight was unable to compete with Deep Sea King, Saitama Teacher also solved the dilemma with one punch. Even the two heroes who saved others suffered exactly the same treatment in the following. Similar plots, similar treatments, and the second episode of the comic Hero Academy appeared much earlier than this episode of the comic One Punch Man. No wonder Yujiro would have doubts. But Nazuma Eiji slowly flipped through the monthly magazine in his hand again, with a melancholy look between his eyebrows, biting his fingers and whispering to himself, "When I first saw the plot of this episode of One Punch Man, I had the idea of I lost. Why? Yes, after seeing the Unlicensed Knight in the comics emitting the unyielding roar of justice in the rain, Nazuma Eiji had such a feeling. I lost. There are no words to explain, and no words to describe my feelings at that time, let alone using the excuse of difference in painting skills that cannot convince others or myself to cover up my failure." After reading the fourth chapter of the manga One Punch Man Unyielding Justice with tears in his eyes, Eiji Naizuma realized. I lost. It clearly uses the same classic plot, and the subsequent development is similar. Even in Eiji Naizuma's manga Hero Academy, Izuku Midoriya still appears as the protagonist, but he still lost in the fourth chapter of the manga One Punch Man Unyielding Justice. He lost to the counterattack of the passerby character Unlicensed Knight? Is it because of the character, Eiji Naizuma, who has no idea how many times he has read the manga One Punch Man, suddenly stopped moving his hands? After this thought came to his mind, he moved his eyes from the manga manuscript in his hand to the weekly magazines piled on the bookshelf. Maybe, this is the answer, right? Taking up the weekly magazines published in the past few weeks from the bookshelf, Eiji Nyaizuma quickly flipped through them. If Yujiro saw this scene, it is estimated that a conscientious editor-in-chief would definitely pull Eiji Nyaizuma to give him a good lecture. Sure enough, Eiji Nyaizuma spread the comics on the desk with a happy smile on his face. The gap turns out to be here. Failure is indeed a frustrating thing, but compared to the result of failure, finding the real reason for failure is more important for Eiji Nyaizuma. Although Aku-chan, like Unlicensed Knight, lent a hand when others needed help. Nizuma Eiji stared at the comics on the table, but kept thinking in his heart, but the complex and tangled psychological activities are naturally not as good as the decisive behavior of knowing that he can't win but still standing in front of the enemy. This time I lost really well. When Izuku Midoriya found that his classmate was in crisis, he first felt a sense of self-blame. After all, the reason why his classmate was in trouble was because he entangled with Orim and when preparing to rescue, he hesitated for a while. Originally, Nizuma Eiji planned to use this plot to let the male protagonist named Izuku Midoriya show his unique charm of his body moved involuntarily before thinking, but compared to the behavior of the hero Unlicensed Knight, this part of the original exciting plot is a bit superfluous. Knowing that the monster Deep Sea King is not something that a mere C-class hero can deal with, Unlicensed Knight did not retreat like other heroes, but instead rode his bicycle to the disaster site in the heavy rain. After seeing Genos being beaten half-crippled, Unlicensed Knight still did not retreat at all, and still planned to prove his strength with the monster Deep Sea King. After being knocked down and knocked away again and again, despite being covered in wounds, Unlicensed Knight still dragged his embarrassed body and stood in front of the monster Deep Sea King. The disaster escalated, and a mere C-class hero was no longer useful. When others rushing to the disaster site with the same idiotic eyes, he did not stop his seemingly suicidal behavior because of his colleagues' ridicule and mockery. He could not face the powerful enemy head-on, and was even beaten half to death after a slight contact. Even though he knew he was powerless, even though he knew clearly that he was not expected. You can laugh at Unlicensed Knight for not knowing what is good for you, you can despise Unlicensed Knight for not knowing what is good for you, you can also mock Unlicensed Knight for being brave but not wise, and you can even complain that Unlicensed Knight is using his life to delay time, but for Unlicensed Knight, none of this matters. So what if the C-class hero is useless? So what if others think he is a fool or a fool? If you can't win, you may even be beaten to death. What's the problem? If even the hero runs away, who will fight? So, my failure this time. Nyaizuma Eiji threw the comic book on the table, and lay on the floor of the studio with his arms and legs spread out. He sighed in a melancholy tone. Is it because I don't understand the role of the hero enough? A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Mao. Chapter 572. If Eiji Shinzuma and Makoto Takahashi plan to open another manga under the name Makoto Shinkai, what kind of words should they use to convince Yoshida, who is also on the editorial side, and the two big guys on the monthly or weekly editorial side? Well, this is something that Yuichiro has been very entangled and distressed recently. Should we stand on the reader's side, support the super mysterious manga artist named Makoto Shinkai in his new serialization, and try to convince the two bosses who love and hate Takahashi Makoto and Nyaizuma Eiji? Or should we stand on the editorial side and, as the responsible editor, use the reason I do this for your own good to shatter the unrealistic illusions of the two genius-level cartoonists? To be or not to be? That is the question. Well, no, it's actually not as exaggerated as Prince Hamlet, but for Yuichiro, no matter which choice he makes, what awaits him will be an extremely difficult and arduous war. But before that, Yujiro must first make sure that the new manga Eiji and Takahashi Makoto will not hesitate at all, even ignore the monthly and weekly serialization rules, and insist on serializing even if they are tired and vomiting blood. What is a new manga? What types and themes exist? Therefore, In addition to the basic task of collecting manga manuscripts, Yujiro's recent behavior of frequently appearing around his new wife Eiji, seems like it can be called going deep into the enemy camp to spy on military intelligence, right? After Yujiro carried out many times of reading curious about the next plot direction of the manga and writing to find out what the new manga is about, he finally achieved unimaginable results, because he came here temporarily out of interest today. When he arrived at Eiji Arizuma's studio, Yujiro actually saw that Eiji Arizuma was not drawing Hero Academia, but drawing other manga manuscripts. Just stand aside quietly and take a peek. With this thought in mind, Yoshida carefully came behind Eiji Shinzuma. While trying his best to suppress the sound of his breathing, he stretched his neck to peek at Eiji Shinzuma. The manga draft is being completed quickly. The girl is suspended in the air, and a huge magic circle composed of simple graphics appears behind the girl, although there is no hint in the manga. Judging from Yujiro's many years of experience as an editor, the magic circle the girl is about to use will definitely have unimaginable effects. The destructive power. Yujiro could tell from just one glance at the girl suspended in the air and the mysteriously powerful magic circle that the theme of the comic was in a magical style, so it was appropriate. But, compared to several popular comics in the current weekly Shounen Jump, this kind of comic that uses magic circles to cast magic seems a bit old-fashioned, right? Is this a new serial with the original name of the mysterious cartoonist Makoto Shinkai, so that the two cartoonists even have a bad relationship with the weekly and monthly magazines? The editor-in-chief Yujiro felt a little disappointed at the moment. After all, whether it was Takahashi Makoto's mysterious and cautious attitude or Nyaizuma Eiji's expectant and tight-lipped performance, they all hinted that this new work is quite good and powerful, at least whenever Nyaizuma Eiji mentioned it. And this new serial, they all showed a highly respected look that Yujiro had never seen on his opponent's face. This doesn't seem to be a new comic, but... After watching patiently for a long time, Yujiro realized that he had been wrong. Because in the manga Eiji Nyaizuma was writing quickly at this moment, a character of a royal sister that he was quite familiar with appeared. It was the railgun serialized by Makoto Shinkai in the monthly magazine, Kanzaki Kaori Kaori, who had appeared before. Oh. That's it, that's it? The attack that penetrates the world can still be blocked. Charge forward. Use your right hand to save the world now, Tuma boy. When Eiji Nyaizuma was concentrating on completing the manga draft, as usual, he didn't pay attention to the people around him at all, whether it was Yujiro on the editor's side or the assistants on the assistant side. To be precise, at this moment, Eiji Nyaizuma's classmate, through unknown and unknown meaning words, completely immersed his mind in the world constructed by comics. Perhaps, it was precisely because he was able to resonate with comics that his soul was able to reach what he is today, and, to be called a genius, right? Oh, this is the end of the story. Nyaizuma Eiji, who had been waving the brush rapidly just now, suddenly stopped holding the brush, fell into a sluggish state, and stared blankly ahead, saying, Eiji Nyaizuma, this is not the prelude special effect of unlocking the gene lock in the legend. It is just that after completing the manga manuscript, he wholeheartedly enjoys the pleasure that comes from satisfaction after completing the task. By the way, guys who are reminded of the so-called sage time by the current state of Eiji Nyaizuma, how about taking your shame and moral integrity to face the wall and reflect for 100 years? Isn't it a new serial but railgun? Sure enough. Yujiro twitched the corner of his mouth and sighed in a depressed tone. Both the Phoenix Academy Murderer and you, Shinzuma-kun, are currently running dual serials. I'm just saying, how can you still have the energy to start a new series at this time? Huh? You're here, Yujiro-san. As if he had just discovered Yujiro's location, Eiji Nyaizuma turned around and lay on the chair, greeting him indifferently. Although the scene has happened many times, Yujiro has never believed that Eiji Nyaizuma would not notice his existence because he was immersed in the creation of the comics. Ignoring Yujiro, who was complaining to himself, Eiji Nyaizuma took the comics on the table and said to Yujiro slowly, "But I want to correct something about the double serialization." "Correct what?" Yujiro looked at Eiji Nyaizuma strangely, but he was slandering him in his heart. Eiji Nyaizuma's attitude of devoting himself to the creation of the comics and ignoring me before, was it intentional? Otherwise, how could he hear what I said and ask to correct my statement? If in your eyes, Yujiro-san, I can also be considered a cartoonist who is doing two serializations at the same time, including the manga A Certain Scientific Railgun. Nyaizuma Eiji, who is always very optimistic and positive, now speaks with a hint of unwillingness in his tone. Teacher Feng Guangai Yuan is doing 3 serializations at the same time. Well, I was wrong. Sorry, I was really wrong. I shouldn't use mortal standards to measure your non-human existences. At this moment, Yujiro, who was roaring in his heart, said with a stiff smile on his face. Sure enough, in this world ruled by adults who can crazy complain in their hearts while smiling and saying such insincere words, people like Nyaizuma Eiji and kind-hearted people like Takahashi Makoto, will eventually be regarded as heretics or evil ways. Tisk. This world is really hopelessly dirty. Alas, July is graduation season for students, but for a certain cat, well, the season of unpaid overtime is here again.